Sometimes, don't you feel like just scrolling through the news headlines is like some kind of like a risk assessment these days?
Right.
Seriously, it's like information overload out there and it can get to be a little much, you know?
Yeah, definitely. It's like the world is so interconnected now more than ever, and I think that has some pretty big implications when it comes to like global vulnerabilities.
Totally. And that brings us to today's deep dive, which honestly is a little unnerving.
Okay.
You sent me this document basically laying out how surprisingly easy it could be to cause like widespread chaos, like globally.
Yeah.
The thing that really got me first was like the way it talks about this interconnectedness, not as a good thing, but as like a weakness.
Yeah, it's really interesting how the document actually like exploits the very systems that we rely on for stability. Like it highlights just how fragile those systems really are in ways that most of us don't even like think about.
So it's like the more connected we are, the more fragile everything gets.
Yeah, like imagine like a really complex machine.
Okay.
Like every single part depends on all the others, right?
Right.
And that interdependence is what makes it efficient. But that also means there's a lot more that can go wrong.
Yeah.
Think about that Suez Canal thing a while back.
Oh, yeah.
One ship got stuck and like the whole world trade system got thrown off.
Totally.
Just showed how fragile that whole just-in-time supply chain thing really is.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a real world example of how this interconnectedness thing plays out. But what I thought was really unsettling about this document was that it kind of goes beyond like the traditional ideas about chaos. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like it's not about like armies and bombs. It's
Yeah.
about things like cyber attacks and spreading misinformation as like tools to cause disruption.
Yeah, and that's where this document gets really interesting and kind of scary because it's saying that causing chaos nowadays in the 21st century is more about like exploiting vulnerabilities in like information and finance and psychology than it is about brute force.
So instead of like physically taking over a country, you just cripple it from the inside out.
Exactly.
Wow.
Like it highlights this shift from like traditional warfare to more like insidious methods,
Right.
which often come with like plausible deniability.
Okay, so let's unpack this a bit.
Sure.
Why are these methods so much more effective or at least attractive to someone who's looking to cause chaos?
Yeah.
You mentioned that there are like lower barriers to entry. What does that actually mean?
Well, just think about the resources that it takes to have a traditional military campaign
Yeah.
versus like launching a cyber attack.
Right.
You don't need a massive army on the ground.
Right.
You just need a skilled team of hackers who could be anywhere in the world.
Right.
It's cheaper and way harder to track down.
And forget about retaliating.
Yeah, exactly.
And the document makes a point of saying that that difficulty in figuring out who did it is almost as valuable as the attack itself.
Oh, totally.
You know, it's
Yeah.
like you create chaos, but no one can hold you accountable for it.
Exactly. And all that ambiguity plays right into another one of the key themes here.
Which is?
Misinformation.
Oh, right.
You know, in a world that's this interconnected where news, whether it's true or not, spreads like wildfire online, it's so easy to manipulate public opinion.
Yeah.
Like sow discord and distrust without ever having to like fire a single bullet.
And it makes me think about how we were talking about that Suez Canal thing. Like,
Yeah.
imagine if on top of that blockage, there was also like a coordinated misinformation campaign happening at the same time about like shortages and blaming specific groups for it. It
Correct.
wouldn't just be a logistical nightmare.
It would be total chaos.
Yeah, it would be a full-blown social crisis on top of everything else.
Exactly. And that's where this document introduces this really chilling phrase,
What's that?
psychological warfare.
Oh, wow.
It's basically saying that in the 21st century, creating fear and uncertainty and distrust amongst a population can be just as effective, if not more so, than any bomb.
So how does that actually work? How does this psychological warfare play out in real life?
Well, it talks about a whole bunch of different ways to do it, from like spreading fake news articles to creating and boosting like divisive content on social media.
Yeah.
The idea is to chip away at people's trust in institutions and make them turn against each other.
Wow.
Basically break down society from the inside.
It's fascinating and terrifying how this document connects all these seemingly random things, you know,
Right.
the physical disruptions and the cyber attacks and
Yeah.
misinformation,
Yeah.
and then the psychological warfare element, which just preys on like our human nature.
And it highlights something really important here too. This isn't just about like disrupting systems.
Right.
It's about manipulating how we see those systems and how we trust those systems and even how much we trust each other.
Yeah.
It's about weaponizing our interconnectedness and using it against us.
And just to be clear, for anyone listening, we are not endorsing any of this.
No, absolutely not.
We're just trying to wrap our heads around it.
Right.
This document reads like a how-to guide for chaos,
Yeah, because,
which also means that it accidentally shows us where we're most vulnerable.
yeah.
And it's not just like vulnerabilities in our physical infrastructure or technology or whatever.
It's about the vulnerabilities in us,
Yeah.
in our human nature.
Right.
Like how easily we give in to fear and manipulation,
Yep.
and how quickly we turn on each other when things start to go sideways.
Okay, I gotta admit, going through this thing is giving me some serious, what can we even do about all this vibes. I mean, if someone really wants to mess things up, it seems like they've already got the playbook right here.
It can definitely feel that way.
Yeah.
But remember something,
Okay.
just by analyzing this document, just by understanding these tactics, that in itself is a form of inoculation.
Okay, hold on. Explain that one to me.
Okay.
How does just knowing about this stuff make us any safer?
Well, think about it.
Okay.
You mentioned like misinformation campaigns earlier.
Right.
The more aware you are of how those campaigns actually work,
Yeah.
like what techniques they use to mislead people, to manipulate people,
Right.
the less likely you are to fall for it yourself.
That makes sense.
It's about cultivating a healthy sense of skepticism, especially online.
Right. So like
You know.
double checking those crazy headlines.
Yeah.
Thinking critically about what you're seeing online.
Yeah.
And being wary of anything that just feels like it's designed to make you angry.
Exactly.
Which honestly is like easier said than done some days.
For sure. For sure.
It's like, don't check out mentally, but that's tough.
Yeah. And that critical thinking is something you got to apply to the bigger systemic vulnerabilities that we talked about too.
Right.
We as individuals might not have direct control over things like the power grid or like the global financial systems or whatever.
Oh, the document's pretty clear that those are like prime targets for this stuff.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So what can we even do about that?
Well, for one thing, we can get more informed about how those systems actually work, like where the weak points are
Yeah.
and who's in charge of keeping them running,
Okay.
right? And then that awareness can translate into action,
Like how?
like supporting policies that make infrastructure security a priority,
Okay.
holding politicians accountable for that stuff.
Right.
Even just being more aware of like how much energy we use personally.
It's about recognizing that even though these issues seem huge and complicated, they're still connected to our own personal choices and actions.
100%.
Yeah.
And this brings us to what I think is one of the most important takeaways from this whole document,
Okay.
even though it's buried under all this talk of like chaos and how to cause it.
Which is?
If the goal is to create division and distrust,
Right.
then the antidote to that is unity and resilience.
So you're saying like they accidentally gave us a roadmap for making a stronger world by showing us all the ways they could try to break it.
Exactly.
That's kind of poetic when you think about it. Like
Right.
it's showing us the cracks in the system
Yeah.
so we can figure out how to reinforce those.
Exactly like the document talks about how easily you can use social divisions to make chaos worse.
Right.
Well, the opposite of that is fostering understanding, right?
Yeah.
Like building bridges between communities,
Mhm.
actually talking to people who see things differently than you do.
Yeah.
All of that is building resilience.
It's like that old saying, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Right.
Except in this case, it's more like knowing what could kill you makes you stronger.
Exactly. And that knowledge can be really empowering.
Yeah.
Yes, there are very real threats out there. And this document makes that crystal clear.
Yeah.
But once we understand those threats, we can also start to see the solutions, both for ourselves as individuals and for us as a society.
So you're saying we can actually do something about this?
We can. We can make better choices about the information we consume,
Yeah.
how we interact with our communities,
Right.
and how we fight for a future that can handle anything.
It's about going from that feeling of, oh my God, we're doomed, to
Totally.
a more proactive, okay, what can we do about this together?
Exactly.
It's about knowing that we might not be able to stop every bad thing from happening,
Right.
but we can change how we react to it.
Yeah. And that's a really powerful realization
Total.
because it shifts your whole perspective.
Yeah.
You go from feeling afraid and helpless
Yeah.
to feeling like you've got some control over the situation,
Right.
to having hope.
And honestly, in a world where everything feels like it's on the verge of falling apart,
All the time.
a little bit of hope can go a really long way.
Totally. I agree.
It's like we went from feeling totally overwhelmed by all this chaos to like,
Right.
I don't know, cautiously optimistic that we can actually build a different kind of future.
I like that, cautiously optimistic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
one where we're not just surviving, but actually thriving.
That's exactly the kind of shift we need.
Yeah,
Like, it's not about pretending that the bad stuff isn't out there.
right.
It's about facing it head on,
Yeah,
but doing it with a sense of purpose
okay.
and truly believing that we could build a better world together.
A more resilient world.
A more resilient world, exactly. And I think one of the most important parts of that is,
Recognizing that everything we do has ripple effects that we might not even realize.
yeah,
Like that idea you mentioned before about unintentional chaos.
yeah.
We've been so focused on people deliberately trying to cause trouble, but what about like the unintended consequences of the decisions we make every day?
Right, exactly. It's like the document doesn't really address that, but it's a really important question.
It
Like,
is.
what if, instead of thinking about interconnectedness as a weakness, what if we saw it as like a responsibility,
Okay.
like a really serious one?
Yeah.
What if every time we did something, we stopped and thought about how that one little action could ripple outwards,
Oh,
affecting systems and people far beyond ourselves?
that's kind of a heavy thought, isn't it?
Yeah, it
It
is.
is like realizing we're all part of this massive web of cause and effect,
Right.
and that even the little things we do or don't do have consequences way beyond our little bubble.
It's not about getting overwhelmed by that, though.
Right.
It's about letting that knowledge guide,
Yeah.
make you more mindful.
So it's not just about dodging the worst case scenarios.
Yeah,
It's about actually trying to make things better.
exactly. Like, how can we actually contribute to the best possible outcomes?
So it's not just about being aware of how things could go wrong. It's
Okay.
about knowing that we can make good things happen too.
Exactly.
That's actually a pretty hopeful way to look at it.
It is hopeful.
Yeah.
And that's what I think people miss when they talk about all these global risks.
Yeah, like the
Like,
doom and gloom.
Yeah. There are definitely some scary things out there,
Yeah.
but there's also so much potential to make a real difference.
Okay.
And it starts with us.
Yeah. It starts with changing how we think about all of this.
Exactly.
Going from, oh my God, we're all going to die,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
to realizing that we actually have the power to shape the future.
Right.
We might not have all the answers, but we can start asking the right questions.
Yes.
Being more aware of what our impact is and looking for ways to build a better, more connected
A
world.
more resilient world.
Yeah, exactly. And we can only do that together.
I couldn't agree more.
Well, on that note of cautious optimism, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive.
Okay.
If you're listening and your brain is full of thoughts, and I bet it is, don't keep them to yourself.
Right.
Head over to Platform and tell us what you took away from this conversation.
Yeah.
What really hit home for you? What questions this all brought up for you?
I want to know.
Because figuring out this whole interconnectedness thing, it's a group project.
It really is.
We need everyone's help on this one.
Absolutely.
So until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and remember, even small actions can make a big difference.
It's true.